The night over southern England pulsed with a strange energy. From the cliffs above Dover to the meadows of Kent, engines growled where no real convoys stood. Lights flickered in fields, radios crackled with orders, and shadows of tanks stretched across hedgerows. Yet much of it was nothing but canvas, wood, and air. The paradox was staggering. A force large enough to terrify German intelligence, yet built on illusions. How could a war turn on the strength of an army that did not exist? Spring 1944 was an hourglass of sand running quickly. The Allies had massed millions of men in Britain, preparing to open a Western front. Yet the question was not only when to strike, but how to conceal where. Hitler's fortress Europe stretched from Norway's fjords to the beaches of France, and German planners believed the invasion must come where distance was shortest, across the narrow channel to Pas de Calais. American and British leaders saw in that assumption an opportunity. If they could feed it, nurture it, and inflate it, the Germans would keep divisions far from Normandy. To do so required more than secrecy. It required performance on a continental scale. The decision was simple in words, complex in action. Build an entire army out of lies. They named it the First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, and placed the legendary George S. Patton at its head. Patton was no illusion. His reputation for aggression was as sharp as any blade. German intelligence believed he would lead the main blow, and so the Allies made him the figurehead of shadows. Around him, they built an army of 150,000 men who never existed. U.S. National Archives, 1946. To understand the audacity, one must picture the scale. Across meadows, they placed hundreds of inflatable Sherman tanks, full-sized, painted olive drab, deflating and inflating with pumps. Aircraft of plywood sat in neat rows on makeshift airfields, wings that caught the morning light but would collapse under a child's weight. Artillery batteries of logs painted black pointed toward the channel. Truck parks appeared overnight. Canvas stretched over skeleton frames. At first glance from the sky, it looked real. To German reconnaissance pilots braving flak, it was evidence of an armada forming opposite Calais. Noise added another layer. Loudspeakers broadcast the rumble of engines through valleys. Portable generators kept searchlights glowing where no real planes landed. Radio operators filled the ether with traffic. Coded reports, weather updates, requests for supplies. These were transmitted on frequencies German listening posts monitored. Every sentence was theater. A sergeant later admitted, "We spent days pretending to order gasoline for trucks we didn't have." Signal Corps Memoir, 1945. The Germans listened, counted, calculated. They added units on maps, shifting divisions on their own soil to face ghosts. By May, Hitler had stationed nearly 20 armored divisions in northern France, far from Normandy. The deception worked not by hiding the real, but by amplifying the false. It was the art of camouflage reversed. Instead of making something disappear, it made nothing appear as something vast. Sensory impressions reinforced the trick. Farmers in Kent awoke to the sight of rows of vehicles in their fields, though they weighed less than cattle. Children tapped wings of fake planes and laughed at the hollow sound. Soldiers on leave described seeing camps with smoke rising from stoves, though often the stoves burned little more than dung for effect. To them, the illusion felt absurd, yet its purpose was deadly serious. The entire south of England became a stage. Props scattered across countryside, all aimed at one audience: Adolf Hitler. German reconnaissance pilots carried home photographs. Analysts in Berlin traced shadows, measured tire tracks, noted reflections. To them, each detail confirmed expectation. Calais was the obvious target, the shortest crossing, the direct highway to Germany's heartland. Normandy looked secondary, its beaches less suited, its roads narrow. The deception did not have to convince them fully. It only had to reinforce what they already believed. One intelligence officer later admitted, "We saw what we wished to see." German Intelligence Debrief, 1946. Numbers made the fiction credible. Reports hinted at more than 1,000 landing craft assembled along the Thames. Intercepted chatter spoke of 50 divisions under Patton's command. Supply trains rolled through towns, some carrying genuine cargo, others filled with empty crates for display. When tallied, the figures pointed to an invasion far larger than what was truly possible. By June, German High Command expected the main blow to strike at Calais with overwhelming numbers. The deception had written itself into their plans. The paradox deepened. Real men built the illusion. Units of engineers inflated tanks, trucked fake artillery, painted canvas to mimic metal. Carpenters hammered frames in barns by lantern light. Radio specialists spent hours crafting believable chatter. A corporal recalled, "Our war was fought with brushes and pumps, not rifles." BBC interview, 1962. Yet their impact rivaled divisions in the field. The fake army bound German armor in the wrong place, buying precious hours on June 6th. Behind it all, Patton played his role. Though grounded after slapping a soldier in Sicily, he was too valuable a symbol to hide. Germans respected him, even feared him. His very presence near Dover, visiting camps of ghosts, was worth divisions. Newspapers printed his movements, feeding German spies. To the enemy, Patton meant power. To the Allies, he was the mask. The ethical questions remain. Was deception a weapon like any other, or did it cross into manipulation forbidden by tradition? Geneva spoke of uniforms and distinction, but said little about shadows. At the time, commanders argued it saved lives by diverting German fire. Today, historians debate whether building armies of lies altered the moral landscape of war. Was it ingenuity or trickery unbecoming of soldiers? The answers remain contested. Like the fog that rolled across English fields at dawn, the landscape itself bore witness. In quiet villages, locals saw armies come and go in silence. Barns held radio trucks disguised as delivery vans. Roads crumbled under trucks carrying balloons rather than bombs. To them, war felt both real and unreal. They touched fabric tanks, smelled paint on fresh plywood, heard engines that belonged to no convoys. England became both fortress and theater, a land where senses betrayed truth. The mathematics of illusion were relentless. Each fake tank saved a real one from needing to be visible. Each false transmission multiplied divisions on enemy maps. By April, for every real battalion in Kent, 3 phantom battalions existed on paper. Allied planners calculated that for every hour spent inflating a dummy plane, they gained a day of delay in German redeployment. Warfare had become arithmetic of lies, where zeros counted as much as steel. By early June, the deception reached crescendo. Camps bristled with false artillery, barges floated with painted hulls, and radio nets buzzed with traffic. The First U.S. Army Group seemed ready to storm Calais. Hitler himself remained convinced. On June 6th, when news of Normandy landings arrived, he refused to release panzer divisions from the north. He believed the real blow was yet to come. The Phantom Army still held his mind. The irony was brutal. Tens of thousands of German soldiers waited in Calais trenches for an invasion that never came. They stared across waters, scanning horizon, gripping rifles, tasting fear in dry mouths. Yet no boats approached. Their readiness was wasted, their strength locked in place by shadows. Allied soldiers dying in Normandy were shielded by illusions hundreds of miles away. Fiction had killed as surely as bullets. The conclusion of Block 1 leaves a question hanging. What happens when lies become as powerful as truth? In England, an army of balloons and words stood guard. In France, Hitler prepared for a battle that would never arrive. The story of the fake army was only beginning. Winter turned to spring in 1944 with the Channel wrapped in fog and tension. Allied leaders had chosen June for the invasion, but deception had to begin months earlier. Operation Bodyguard was the umbrella, and within it lay Fortitude, the plan to fix German eyes on Calais. Numbers told the story. The Pas de Calais sector sat only 20 miles across the Channel from Dover, half the distance to Normandy. Rail lines from Calais led directly into Germany's industrial heart. It was the logical target. Because it was logical, the Allies resolved to make it inevitable. German intelligence already leaned that way. Reports from Abwehr agents in Britain emphasized the concentration of forces in southeast England. Aerial photos confirmed camps, depots and harbors filled with ships. Even weather patterns favored Calais, where shorter crossings reduced risk. To the German mind, Normandy's beaches were too far, too narrow, too easily defended. The Allies turned this prejudice into a weapon. They amplified every sign that Calais was the storm's eye. Agents of deception played their part. Double agents controlled by MI5 fed Berlin a steady diet of lies. One, codenamed Garbo, built an entire network of fictitious informants, each reporting on troop concentrations near Dover. His dispatches described convoys of trucks, infantry divisions drilling, airfields humming with fighters. German intelligence considered him so reliable that by May, nearly half of their reports on British troop strength came from his hand. MI5 debrief, 1945. The stagecraft on the ground matched the lies on paper. Across Kent and Sussex, engineers raised dummy camps. By day, canvas tents lined fields. By night, lights glowed in orderly grids, visible to reconnaissance planes. Lorries moved in convoys with tarpaulins covering nothing more than wooden frames. Harbors held barges painted in camouflage, yet many were simple hulks incapable of sailing. Pilots flying at 20,000 feet saw what they expected. Massing for Calais. Sensory illusions added depth. Searchlights swept skies above fake airfields. Fires burned in oil drums to simulate kitchen smoke. At night, lamps arranged in rows mimicked runways, guiding planes that never landed. Villagers described the odd glow across hills, eerie and constant. The fields shone like cities, one farmer remembered. BBC interview, 1970. To Germans scanning from the air, it was confirmation. Light became weapon, brighter than steel. Radio games carried the deception further. Operators created entire battalion networks, each with distinct call signs, traffic, and chatter. Messages requested fuel deliveries, coordinated maneuvers, and discussed weather. German intercept units, listening intently, plotted this noise into patterns. They saw brigades forming, divisions shifting, an army swelling opposite Calais. Each signal stitched another piece of cloth into the fabric of illusion. Numbers reinforced the mirage. Reports estimated 50 divisions stationed in Britain, half poised for Calais. Ship counts suggested over 2,000 landing craft assembled in Thames estuaries. In reality, only a fraction existed. But when columns of figures arrived on Hitler's desk, they matched his instinct. Confirmation bias became strategy. He was certain the main blow must fall at Calais. One officer testified after the war. U.S. National Archives, 1946. Meanwhile, real troops gathered quietly in southwest England. Divisions earmarked for Normandy drilled on Devon beaches. Supplies flowed to Plymouth and Southampton under cover of darkness. To shield them, deception in the southeast had to roar louder. The greater the silence in the west, the brighter the lights in Kent. The fake army shouted so the real one could whisper. German reconnaissance photographs arrived daily in Berlin. Analysts traced tire marks leading to dummy tanks, unaware they were drawn by tractors. They measured the length of shadows from wooden aircraft. They plotted supposed fuel dumps, each marked by carefully arranged barrels filled with sand. To them, every element fit expectation. In intelligence, coherence often outweighed truth. They saw patterns, and patterns confirmed belief. On the German side, the consequences grew. By March, the 15th Army, tasked with defending northern France, received reinforcements. Nearly a third of Hitler's panzer divisions in the west were stationed near Calais. Normandy, by contrast, received fewer troops and weaker fortifications. Rommel, overseeing Atlantic defenses, begged for more resources in Normandy, warning of vulnerability. His pleas were brushed aside. The Führer is convinced Calais is the objective, noted a staff diary. Wehrmacht Archive, 1944. For Allied planners, this was success measured in miles and days. Each division fixed near Calais would take days to redeploy once the invasion began. Time was the most precious commodity. If German armor remained in the north for even a week after D-Day, the beachhead in Normandy could expand beyond danger. Deception thus became not merely trickery, but a shield of time. The ethical capsule arises here. Deception had long been part of war, ambushes, camouflage, feints. But to build entire armies of illusion raised questions. Did soldiers fighting in Normandy owe their survival to lies as much as to courage? Geneva spoke little of falsehood. Then, commanders argued that every German tank kept idle at Calais saved Allied lives. Today, historians debate whether the manipulation of truth on such scale blurred lines between soldier and actor. Was warfare now theater? And if so, where lay honor? For those on English soil, the play was real. Locals awoke to endless convoys of trucks filled with nothing, roads jammed by vehicles that weighed less than hay carts. Children touched the skins of inflatable tanks, giggling at their softness. From cliffs, fishermen watched barges rocking at anchor, knowing many would sink if they ever set sail. Yet secrecy bound them. They understood that their fields had become weapons. The Germans reinforced their misjudgment with logic. Calais was the narrowest point. Calais had the strongest defenses. Calais led directly to Germany. To them, an attack on Normandy looked irrational, and thus unlikely. The Allies exploited this reasoning, feeding it with false evidence until it appeared inevitable. The strength of the deception lay not in invention, but in magnification of what the enemy already believed. By May, confidence in the Phantom Army was absolute. Hitler issued directives keeping panzer divisions near Calais, even after reports of Normandy buildup trickled in. When double agents occasionally hinted at other targets, their credibility only grew because they seemed balanced. Garbo, for instance, warned of diversions, but always returned to Calais as main point. Berlin trusted him more with each word. The magnitude of the deception reflected the stakes. Failure on D-Day would prolong war by years. Losses could reach hundreds of thousands. Factories in Detroit and Birmingham had produced ships and tanks at unprecedented rates, but material alone could not guarantee success. The mines had to be shaped. The Germans had to be convinced that steel and men pointed elsewhere. Only then could the real blow land. By June 1st, the illusion stood complete. From the air, Kent looked like a bristling fortress. From radio waves, it sounded like an army in motion. From spies, it appeared inevitable. German high command stared at this picture and prepared accordingly. They sharpened defenses at Calais, dug trenches, placed artillery. Normandy, quiet and unassuming, remained secondary. When Allied soldiers climbed into landing craft on June 5th, they did so under the cover of an army made of air. The light that filled English nights told the story. Villagers saw fields glow as if cities had sprung up. Pilots saw landing strips illuminated, though no planes touched down. German reconnaissance saw radiance where darkness should have ruled. In war, light was life, and here, false light guarded the real darkness. It was the glow of illusion, brighter than truth. As June approached, the deception achieved its peak. Hitler's maps brimmed with phantom divisions. His reserves crouched in the wrong place. The Allies had done what once seemed impossible. They had convinced the enemy to prepare for a war that would never come. The fake army stood tall, not in flesh, but in belief. German reconnaissance pilots returned from sorties over Kent with rolls of film still warm from the cameras. In dark rooms, analysts laid out photographs that seemed to confirm everything Berlin expected. There were rows of Sherman tanks, barrels stacked high in depots, convoys stretching down country lanes. They marked them with grease pencils, circled shadowed shapes, and counted divisions where none existed. Each print became a piece of evidence in a growing narrative. Hitler's generals believed they saw an army swelling in the southeast, and in their conviction lay the seed of disaster. Reports flooded up the chain of command. In May 1944 alone, over 400 reconnaissance missions covered Britain's southern coast. Nearly half focused on Dover and surrounding areas. Analysts compiled tonnage estimates, concluding that more than 2,000 landing craft were concentrated there. The figures were precise, detailed, and wrong. German intelligence lived in the smell of darkroom chemicals and the echo of their own assumptions. They saw patterns because they wanted them. In Berlin, debates flared. Some officers, skeptical, pointed to signs of buildup near Portsmouth and Plymouth. Others noted that Normandy offered beaches long enough to host divisions. Yet their voices fell under the weight of Hitler's certainty. He spoke with conviction. The enemy will strike at Calais, the direct path into the Reich. Wehrmacht, Staff Notes, 1944. The Führer's belief hardened into doctrine, and the General Staff aligned with it. Doubt became disloyalty. Meanwhile, the Allies refined their illusions. Radio networks grew louder. Operators filled the air with traffic, carefully structured so German intercepts would appear authentic. Messages referenced fuel shortages, troop movements, and weather delays. Some even discussed fake leave rotations. A British sergeant later recalled, "We spent days arguing over which imaginary unit had too much bread." Imperial War Museum Oral History, 1961. Each signal reeked of banality, and precisely for that reason, it convinced. Physical deception deepened. Camps lit fires that burned day and night, the smoke drifting across hedgerows. Villagers smelled acrid plumes of dung and oil, fuel for stoves that cooked no food. Inflatable tanks rubbed against each other, their rubber skins carrying the sharp tang of fresh paint. Mechanics splashed gasoline across wooden aircraft to leave the scent of aviation in the air. German reconnaissance never smelled these details, but they reinforced the illusion for anyone on the ground. To the senses, the army seemed real. Double agents continued their dance. Garbo's network reported constant reinforcements to the First U.S. Army Group. His fictitious informants described soldiers crowding pubs in Dover, trains laden with artillery, convoys stretching across Kent. The Abwehr devoured his reports. In 1 month, Garbo sent over 500 messages, each reinforcing the Calais myth. MI5 Debrief, 1945. By June, Berlin trusted him so completely that his words outweighed photographs from Normandy. Tension rose within German high command. Rommel, tasked with defending the Atlantic Wall, argued urgently that Normandy was vulnerable. He visited beaches, measuring tides, studying terrain. He warned of weaknesses, urging stronger fortifications. Yet his warnings clashed with Hitler's conviction. Calais is the target, the Führer repeated. U.S. National Archives, 1946. Rommel's requests went unanswered. Troops and tanks remained tied to the north. The Phantom Army had bound them as securely as chains. The mathematics of deception grew staggering. For every real soldier in Kent, German intelligence counted 3. For every real ship in British harbors, they estimated 5. By late May, Berlin believed over 1 million men were preparing opposite Calais. The actual invasion force for Normandy was half that. Numbers became weapons sharper than bayonets, cutting into the enemy's perception. In war, statistics could kill. For Allied soldiers building the illusion, life blurred between absurdity and duty. Engineers inflated tanks at dawn, watching canvas bulge into shape. Painters coated plywood wings with fresh green paint. Radio men filled hours with chatter that no one answered. It felt like children's games, one private admitted. But the stakes were life and death. BBC interview, 1963. They knew their work would never fire a shot, yet might save thousands. The deception extended to the seas. Dummy landing craft floated in estuaries crafted from wood and canvas, incapable of crossing the channel. Yet they bobbed with convincing silhouettes, visible to reconnaissance. Naval radios added chatter, reporting on exercises that never took place. Lights blinked at night as if signaling maneuvers. German spies reported constant activity at Dover harbors. The Phantom Fleet, like the Phantom Army, grew more tangible with each passing day. As the calendar turned to June, German readiness stiffened. Divisions dug into Calais, building trenches, and placing artillery, stringing barbed wire. Soldiers waited for an invasion that never came. They smelled salt air and diesel from their own engines, senses sharpened by fear. Yet the boats never appeared. Their vigilance was wasted, their strength misplaced. Normandy, quiet in comparison, prepared to erupt. The ethical question sharpened here. Deception was no longer just concealment, it was creation. Did the Allies cross a line by manufacturing entire realities? Geneva had rules for uniforms, for combatants, for treatment of prisoners. But what of lies so vast they shaped an entire campaign? At the time, commanders defended it as necessity. Today, scholars wonder whether war became theater, soldiers reduced to actors, truth drowned in smoke. Still, the calculus remained. Each German tank fixed at Calais meant fewer confronting the beaches of Normandy. The smell of deception lingered across England. Smoke from fake kitchens, oil spilled on dirt roads, gasoline fumes from idle engines. Farmers cursed the damage to fields, though they understood the purpose. Children wrinkled noses at acrid air drifting from camps. To them, war was not only sound and sight, but odor, omnipresent, undeniable. Senses bore witness to illusions as much as to reality. As June 5th approached, tension in Berlin reached fever pitch. Reports confirmed Calais as the target. Reconnaissance counted barges by the hundreds. Agents swore Patton's army stood ready. When word of landings in Normandy arrived on June 6th, Hitler dismissed them as diversion. He believed the real blow still waited across from Calais. Hours turned to days before he released divisions. Those days gave the Allies the margin they needed. The Phantom Army had achieved its purpose. It had fooled the German High Command, bound their strength, and opened the door to victory. The consequences of those deceptions would unfold on French beaches, but the battle of illusions had already been won. Dawn broke on June 6th, with surf pounding Normandy's beaches. Smoke rose from bombardments, ships stretched to the horizon, and paratroopers already fought inland. Yet in Berlin, the first reports were treated with suspicion. Hitler and his staff believed this was a feint. Normandy, they said, could not be the main blow. The real strike was still to come at Calais. Thus began the most dangerous delay of the German war effort. Frontline commanders sent urgent messages. By mid-morning, 7th Army headquarters reported heavy landings along a 50-mile front. Divisions stationed in the area begged for reinforcements. But Hitler's orders were clear. Armored reserves near Calais were not to move. He insisted they hold position for the main assault. The deception had survived the collision with reality. Even as men fought and died on the sand, the Phantom Army held German strength in chains. In field bunkers, officers felt the weight of steel around them. Helmets pressed against skulls, rifles dug into shoulders. The rough texture of sandbags scratched bare hands. They watched enemy soldiers pour ashore in waves, yet orders forbade release of divisions that could drive them back. For those on the ground, the contradiction was tangible. They felt the texture of war, the roughness of reality, but they obeyed illusions shaped miles away. Radio deception continued relentlessly. Allied operators maintained chatter from Kent, reporting fictitious preparations for a massive crossing. Signals described embarkation schedules, weather delays, and fuel shortages. German intercept units recorded each line, convinced the Calais invasion was imminent. Even while watching Normandy unfold, they heard the Phantom Army speak. Sound-bound perception tighter than sight. Double agents added fuel. Garbo, Britain's most valuable deception asset, reported that Normandy was indeed a diversion. His fabricated informants confirmed that Patton's First U.S. Army Group was preparing for the true strike across the narrow channel. Berlin praised his accuracy. "Your reports align with our expectations," a German handler messaged. MI5 debrief, 1945. For the Abwehr, Normandy remained secondary, a noisy distraction before the storm. The numbers held them prisoner. German intelligence counted over 1 million Allied troops in Britain, and only half had supposedly moved. If Normandy consumed one force, another remained for Calais. By June 7th, Hitler insisted, "The decisive blow will fall at the Pas de Calais." U.S. National Archives, 1946. Days passed, battles raged, but armored divisions waited, their engines silent. Each day lost was a gift to the Allies, allowing a fragile beachhead to solidify. On the ground in Normandy, German units fought with desperation. They lacked armor, artillery, and air support. Soldiers felt the brutal weight of rifles without enough ammunition, the press of uniforms soaked in seawater, the grit of sand lodged in boots. Against them came endless Allied reinforcements, carried by ships flowing in tides. The imbalance was crushing, yet reserves sat idle just 100 miles away. They belonged to an army fighting a mirage. Commanders debated fiercely. Rundstedt argued for immediate counterattack. Rommel demanded release of reserves. Both knew time was slipping, but Hitler overruled them. His faith in the Phantom Army proved immovable. He even forbade movement of panzers by day, fearing Allied aircraft would destroy them. Trains loaded with tanks stood still, soldiers waiting in boredom, their fingers brushing cold metal barrels, itching for combat. The deception had not only fooled Germany, it had immobilized it. In England, villagers continued to see activity in fake camps. Trucks rolled, lights burned, soldiers marched in drills. Journalists later recorded that even locals doubted whether the army was real. "We saw tanks, but when touched, they wobbled," one man laughed. BBC Oral History, 1967. Yet the performance continued, not for British eyes, but for German ones. Reconnaissance planes still flew overhead, photographing shadows of power that did not exist. The ethical question deepened. Was it just to hold enemy divisions hostage through lies, while real soldiers bled in Normandy? Allied leaders judged it necessary. They argued that every German tank locked at Calais saved hundreds of lives on the beaches. Historians today still wrestle with the morality. Was it trickery or strategy, a mask or a weapon? Geneva never answered. The silence of law allowed the roar of deception. By June 9th, Allied footholds expanded. Mulberry harbors rose from the sea, unloading thousands of tons of supplies daily. Roads inland grew crowded with trucks, tanks, and artillery. German commanders knew the tide was turning, yet reserves remained frozen. Hitler still believed Calais awaited. He ordered the 15th Army to hold position. For soldiers on those beaches, the texture of war was mud, sweat, and steel pressing against skin. For generals, the texture was numbers, reports, and illusions. Both bore weight, but only one could win. German pilots flew missions over Kent, still returning with photographs of dummy camps. They traced tire tracks, saw rows of tents, measured barrels stacked neatly. None realized the softness beneath, the hollowness of rubber tanks, the emptiness of wooden frames. Smug with evidence, they briefed their superiors. The Calais army waited. Each photo pressed another nail into the coffin of truth. The Allies exploited every sense. Soldiers smeared grease on dummy tank tracks so it would glisten in sunlight. They left heavy boots to march over dirt, leaving the prints that German agents could photograph. They even moved dummy artillery by hand, dragging it across ruts so reconnaissance would see movement. Each detail was tactile, physical, a touchable reality for the eye in the sky. Germans felt convinced, though they never touched. As days stretched into weeks, the cost mounted. German armor near Calais could have crushed the Allies in Normandy had it moved swiftly. Instead, it sat idle. Soldiers grew restless, gripping rifles in boredom, cleaning tank barrels that never fired. One officer later confessed, "We were ready, but chained to a ghost." Wehrmacht Memoirs, 1947. The ghost was Patton's First U.S. Army Group, a creation of canvas, rubber, and lies. By mid-June, Hitler began to suspect, but still hesitated. Normandy was real, but he insisted Calais remained the decisive point. He waited for the second blow, convinced that Allies would never commit their main force to a place so vulnerable. The deception endured even as evidence piled high. Faith overrode reality, and armies paid the price. Allied planners smiled grimly. Their task had succeeded beyond hope. Time was blood, and each day saved lives. Tanks rolled inland, supply lines stretched, momentum grew. The Phantom Army still stood guard across the Channel, binding German strength. The victory at Normandy was written not only in courage, but in touch. The press of illusions against the enemy's skin, rough and heavy as truth. July 1944 opened with smoke still hanging over Normandy. Fields were blackened, villages crushed, and Allied columns grew stronger each day. Yet along the Pas de Calais, more than 200,000 German troops still stood idle. They drilled, cleaned weapons, and watched the Channel. Their rations tasted of stale bread and bitter coffee substitute. To them, each day promised battle, but none came. They waited for an enemy that did not exist. German intelligence continued to reinforce the illusion. Reconnaissance photographs still showed dummy camps. Shadows fell just right across inflated tanks, wooden artillery, and parked vehicles. Analysts traced them carefully, adding figures to reports. Patton's First U.S. Army group remains intact. One summary declared, German High Command Report, July 1944. Numbers carried the flavor of certainty, and certainty chained divisions to Calais. Meanwhile, in Normandy, the taste of war was dust and blood. Soldiers coughed on clouds raised by endless convoys. American armor chewed through bocage hedgerows, engines roaring, exhaust choking villages. Each bite of food tasted of grit, every sip of water tainted with mud. For them, the deception at Calais was invisible. They only knew that German resistance seemed strangely thin for such a decisive front. Allied planners smiled grimly. The longer the 15th Army stayed north, the safer the beachhead became. Eisenhower noted in his diary, "If these troops had been released to Normandy, our losses would have doubled." U.S. National Archives, 1946. The Phantom Army continued to fight without firing. Its weapon was absence. Its strike, the denial of enemy strength. German officers in Calais grew restless. Days stretched into weeks, with no sign of invasion. Soldiers drilled until muscles ached. Boots rubbed raw against ankles, blisters tasting of iron when bitten open. They swallowed boredom, as bitter as any ration. Some whispered doubts. Had they been deceived? Yet orders held them fast. The Führer insisted the blow was still to come. Radio deception persisted. Allied operators kept channels buzzing with chatter about training exercises, embarkation, and logistical delays. German intercepts collected every line, convinced of authenticity. Double agents confirmed the narrative. Garbo reported that Normandy was diversionary, a mere prelude. His fictitious sources spoke of massive reinforcements waiting across Kent. Berlin believed him so deeply that they decorated him. Trust turned lies into truth. In Normandy, the Allies broke the German line at St. Lo. Tanks surged through gaps. Infantry poured forward. Operation Cobra, launched in late July, smashed German defenses. Dust hung thick, the taste of chalk coating tongues. Exhaust fumes mingled with the bitter smoke of artillery, yet German armor at Calais did not move. They still licked dry bread, still stared across the channel. Their strength remained caged. Hitler's conviction proved immovable. On July 28th, he declared, "The main landing has not yet occurred. Normandy is but a demonstration." Wehrmacht Communications, 1944. His generals obeyed, even as evidence mounted. Divisions capable of altering battle stood silent. Normandy burned, while Calais feasted on illusions. The ethical capsule sharpened. Deception had moved beyond shadows. It consumed lives. German soldiers died in Normandy without support, while their comrades at Calais died of nothing but boredom. Was it just to lock men into useless waiting, while others bled? At the time, commanders saw only necessity. Today, historians debate whether deception saved lives or simply shifted suffering. Geneva had no answer, and war cared little for philosophy. By August, the Allies launched full breakout. Patton's real army surged across France, racing at speeds that stunned both sides. Tanks swallowed hundreds of kilometers. Supply trucks thundered forward, and resistance crumbled. The taste of liberation filled French towns. Wine opened, bread shared, fruit bursting on tongues after years of hunger. Yet north, German troops still chewed stale rations, convinced they faced the decisive blow. They had prepared for nothing, and nothing came. German intelligence reports still warned of Calais. Photographs showed supposed increases in shipping. Agents whispered of reinforcements. Radio intercepts spoke of delays, not cancellations. Each scrap fed the belief. The Phantom Army refused to die. For the 15th Army, the taste of waiting grew sourer with each day. They licked salt from lips, mouths dry with anticipation, yet still no order came. By mid-August, the Falaise pocket closed around German forces retreating from Normandy. Tens of thousands fell, crushed by converging allies. The destruction could have been lessened if reserves had been released, but they never were. Troops still clung to Calais, prisoners of illusion. One officer wrote, "We felt as if we were shackled to a shadow." German Memoirs, 1946. His words carried the bitterness of failure, the taste of defeat. As Paris rose in liberation, the Calais divisions finally received orders to move. By then, it was too late. Roads clogged with refugees and retreating soldiers. Supplies ran short. Engines choked on dust. Men gnawed on crusts of bread. Their strength arrived only to find defeat already written. The deception had not just delayed them, it had broken them. For the Allies, the taste of victory was mixed. Soldiers drank liberated wine, but remembered friends lost. Officers toasted deception as genius, but mourned the cost. They knew the Phantom Army had held 500,000 Germans at bay, but they also knew that deception had weight. It was not light-hearted trickery. It tasted of ash as much as triumph. By September, the war in France had moved beyond Normandy. The Seine crossed, Paris freed, and Germany's borders loomed ahead. Yet the Phantom Army still lingered in reports. Even as Allied troops advanced, German intelligence feared Calais. The illusion died slowly, its aftertaste lingering long after reality had consumed it. The Phantom had become history. Its weapon had been absence, its strike invisible. Soldiers who waited at Calais carried the taste of futility with them. They remembered bread that crumbled dry, coffee that burned bitter, and anticipation that turned sour. For them, the war ended not with battle, but with waiting for a blow that never came. By September 1944, the Allies had crossed the Seine and liberated Paris. Patton's armored columns thundered east, Montgomery pushed toward Belgium, and Eisenhower's forces surged across France at a pace no one had imagined. Yet, along the Pas de Calais, more than a dozen German divisions still clung to their positions. They manned bunkers, polished weapons, and stared across the Channel, waiting for an army that had never existed. The deception had outlived its necessity, but its shadow still dictated German strategy. The illusion persisted because German intelligence kept feeding it. Reconnaissance flights still photographed dummy installations. In the weak autumn light, shadows stretched convincingly across canvas tents and rubber tanks. Wooden frames painted olive drab gleamed under the drizzle. Analysts in Berlin pored over the photographs and wrote reports declaring the First U.S. Army Group intact. Even as Allied tanks rolled through Belgium, the ghost of Patton's Phantom Army haunted German minds. For the soldiers stationed at Calais, the war felt strangely suspended. Days blurred in monotony. The glow of campfires lit damp uniforms. The faint smoke of wet wood stung eyes. Men huddled around stoves, warming hands over feeble flames. They spoke in hushed tones about battles raging elsewhere. Each night, searchlights swept empty skies, their beams slicing through mist. The light revealed nothing but waiting. Hitler reinforced the illusion with his own conviction. He declared that Normandy was only the opening feint, that the decisive thrust still lay ahead. Even after Paris fell in late August, he insisted the Allies would attempt a direct strike at the Pas de Calais to shorten supply lines. His generals, trapped between evidence and orders, obeyed. Armored divisions that might have blunted Patton's rush toward Germany sat motionless, their tanks collecting rain. Reports from Allied double agents sustained the fantasy. Garbo continued to send carefully crafted messages. "The main effort is still being prepared," he wrote, attributing delays to logistical bottlenecks. His fictitious network of informants confirmed the story. German handlers applauded him, calling his intelligence invaluable. MI5 debrief 1945, lies glowed brighter than truth under the dim light of expectation. On the ground, German soldiers endured harsh conditions. Rations grew thin, supplies scarce. Bread tasted sour, ersatz coffee acrid. Autumn rains turned camps into mud pits, boots squelching with every step, yet they remained vigilant. Each flash of lightning across the Channel could signal invasion. Each engine hum could be Allied bombers. The anticipation gnawed harder than hunger. Meanwhile, the Allies advanced relentlessly. Antwerp fell in early September. Brussels was liberated. Supply lines strained, but momentum seemed unstoppable. Still, German divisions at Calais held firm. They dug trenches, manned fortifications, and trained as if the great blow could come any day. Their loyalty to illusion deprived the front of strength it desperately needed. One German officer later wrote, "We waited for an enemy who never came. We saw lights across the channel and believed. We heard radios crackle and trusted. We touched cold steel daily, but it never fired. Wehrmacht Memoirs, 1947. His words captured the futility. They were armed, prepared, but chained to shadows. Ethical debates later surfaced. Was sustaining the deception beyond June necessary? Allied commanders argued yes. Every German division tied down at Calais meant fewer soldiers resisting the advance across France. Critics countered that the deception prolonged suffering by feeding illusions when truth was evident. Geneva had no clause about fake armies. Was a wooden tank a weapon? The silence of law left the answer to history. The sensory landscape of autumn deepened the surreal. Fog rolled across fields, muting sound. Lanterns flickered in damp barracks, casting long shadows over weary faces. Soldiers rubbed condensation from windows, staring at a channel that reflected pale moonlight. They watched for ships that never appeared. Light, their constant companion, revealed only emptiness. By October, Allied forces had reached the German frontier, yet German command still considered Calais a potential landing site. Troops there built fortifications with aching hands, hauling concrete, driving steel beams. Fingers cracked and bled in the cold. Each blister hardened, but the purpose grew more absurd. They built defenses against a phantom. The deception had become self-sustaining. Initial lies were reinforced by German expectation, then by Hitler's stubbornness, then by the inertia of military bureaucracy. Every false photograph, every double-agent message, every staged radio transmission added another layer. Even when reality screamed otherwise, the glow of the illusion still blinded. For Allied leaders, the persistence was astonishing. Eisenhower noted privately that the enemy still holds strong forces opposite Calais is proof of our success. U.S. National Archives, 1946. Deception was no longer about enabling D-Day. It had become about draining German strength indefinitely. The fake army outlived its purpose, yet still delivered dividends. German soldiers at Calais grew bitter. They tasted rust on rifle barrels, licked rain from cracked lips, chewed on hard crusts of bread. They longed for action, yet dreaded it too. Their war was one of waiting, illuminated by flickering lamps, punctuated by the hollow echo of boots on wet stone. Some wondered aloud, had they been abandoned, or were they the final shield against invasion? By late October, the truth could no longer be denied. Allied armies stood at Germany's borders. Still, some divisions clung to Calais, frozen by orders. They manned empty bunkers, patrolled deserted beaches, watched waves crash endlessly. The channel glowed silver under autumn moons, reflecting a silence that mocked them. Historians later calculated the cost. Nearly 20 German divisions remained pinned at Calais well into September, some until November. That meant over 300,000 men never faced the Allies in France, when resistance might have slowed the advance. The deception was no longer a tactical trick. It was a strategic stranglehold. One Allied officer recalled, "Every day they stayed at Calais was another day our men advanced more freely. Our ghosts fought harder than any soldiers." British War Memoir, 1946. His words carried both pride and unease. Victory had come from lies as much as bullets. By winter, the Phantom Army finally faded. Dummy camps were dismantled, radios fell silent, and agents shifted their stories. Light no longer revealed illusions. It revealed empty fields. Yet the damage was done. Germany had been outmaneuvered by shadows, blinded by beams that shone on nothing. The lesson lingered. Deception could wield light as a weapon. It could illuminate falsehoods, cast shadows, blind truth. For the men who waited at Calais, memory was lit not by fire of battle, but by the pale glow of waiting. For the Allies, the glow of deception guided them to victory. By late August 1944, the Allies had broken out of Normandy and swept across France with a speed that astonished even themselves. German units retreated in disarray, convoys jammed roads, and thousands were captured in the Falaise pocket. The echo of defeat rumbled like distant thunder, rolling eastward. Yet along the Channel coast near Calais, divisions of the German 15th Army remained immobile, still staring across the water. They heard the thunder of artillery far away, but in their own trenches only silence reigned. The contradiction was glaring. Armies collapsed in Normandy while troops in Calais rehearsed drills. They marched on wet gravel, boots grinding, rifles clattering. They performed maneuvers as if expecting a landing any moment. But the sound of invasion never came. The ghost of Patton's Phantom Army continued to roar in German ears even when its physical props had been dismantled. In September, Eisenhower consolidated his front. The Allies captured Brussels and Antwerp, securing vital ports. Each day gained because German forces were missing from Normandy accelerated the offensive. Had the enemy committed the Calais divisions earlier, our advance would have slowed drastically, Eisenhower wrote in a post-war assessment, U.S. National Archives, 1946. The deception had not only saved D-Day, it shaped the tempo of the entire Western campaign. Inside German command, divisions opened between pragmatists and loyalists. Some generals argued that Normandy had clearly been the main invasion, that reserves must be shifted. Others clung to Hitler's insistence. He thundered that the Allies still planned to strike at Calais, supported by false intelligence reports streaming into Berlin. The sound of typewriters hammered out deception reports, while truth screamed from the battlefield. Soldiers at Calais lived within a bubble of noise and silence. Their barracks echoed with shouted orders, the clang of mess tins, the scrape of chairs. But in the distance, nights were broken by faint rumbles. Artillery far away carried by wind. They strained to hear engines of invasion craft, but only waves lapped the shore. Silence became the loudest sound, a hollow echo reminding them daily that they waited for nothing. When Antwerp fell in early September, some German commanders renewed pleas to move their divisions. Yet Hitler delayed. The deception had sunk deep, not only into intelligence, but into the psychology of leadership. He demanded reports confirming the Phantom Army's presence. Double agents obliged. Garbo sent messages that thundered with confidence. The main blow is imminent. His fabricated network echoed agreement. Berlin believed the lies over its own generals. MI5 debrief, 1945. Allied soldiers could not hear the arguments in Berlin, but they felt the effects on the battlefield. As Patton drove into Lorraine and Montgomery prepared Operation Market Garden, resistance was patchy. German counterattacks lacked weight. One officer later reflected, "It was as if we fought an enemy missing half its strength." British War Memoir, 1946. That absence roared louder than any barrage. The ethical question sharpened. Deception had immobilized hundreds of thousands of men, sealing their fate not in battle, but in inaction. Geneva Conventions addressed humane treatment of prisoners, not manipulation of free armies. Was it fair to let soldiers rot in anticipation, never given a chance to fight? At the time, Allied leaders judged it necessary. Today, historians debate whether victory by trickery is less honorable or simply more humane. The sensory detail of sound carried through autumn. Empty barracks creaked in the wind. Loose shutters banged. German patrols marched with rhythmic stomps, echoing down deserted streets. Civilians heard the noise of soldiers, but not of battle. Farmers plowed fields while garrisons drilled endlessly. All the while, the great thunder of war rolled eastward, further each week, leaving Calais a ghost stage of wooden props and empty echoes. By October, Allied forces reached the German frontier. The Siegfried Line awaited, bristling with concrete bunkers and dragon's teeth, yet the 15th Army still lingered. Their footsteps drummed on hollow ground. Their trucks rattled without destination. Hitler's faith in the Phantom had chained them to silence. German memoirs recall frustration. "We listened to distant war we could not join. We were left to wither in idleness." Wehrmacht officer's account, 1947. The costs were immense. Historians later tallied that up to 20 divisions, nearly 300,000 troops, remained inactive for months. In contrast, the Allies exploited their absence. Supply depots grew, ports were secured, and offensives planned. The Phantom Army's echo extended into real victories. The sound of its silence still resonates in accounts of the campaign. In November, Hitler finally conceded the Calais invasion would not occur. Orders released divisions, but too late. The Allies had already breached the frontier. German troops trudged east, boots sloshing in mud, morale broken. They carried rifles that rarely fired, packs weighed with futility. The silence they endured had drained them more than battle. One Allied intelligence officer reflected, "Never have so many soldiers been held by so little substance. Noise and silence, reports and shadows, they fought nothing and lost everything." U.S. War Records, 1946. His words captured the paradox. Sound without battle, orders without purpose, waiting without end. The lesson of sound carried into legacy. The deception proved that war could be fought not only with fire and steel, but with noise and silence. The Phantom Army shouted across radios, hammered through typewriters, clanged in drills, yet it never existed. Its victory was silence on the beaches of Calais, silence in the guns that never fired. For the Allies, the success was decisive. They entered Germany sooner, with fewer losses, because the deception had worked. For the Germans, it was tragedy wrapped in futility. Their soldiers listened to the wrong sounds, obeyed the wrong orders, and trusted the wrong truths. In the end, they were defeated not by what they heard, but by what they failed to hear. In November 1944, the last German divisions withdrew from the defenses of Calais. The beaches, once bristling with soldiers and guns, fell quiet. When Allied patrols entered abandoned bunkers, they found concrete intact, weapons unfired, ammunition stacked in crates. What they did not find was the army they had supposedly faced. The Phantom dissolved with the autumn fog, leaving behind only ruins of belief. After the war, when archives opened and interrogations began, the story of the fake army spilled into light. Generals who had clung to Hitler's orders admitted they had been deceived. "We believed an attack was imminent at Calais until September," confessed one staff officer of the 15th Army, U.S. National Archives, 1946. The admission stunned even Allied analysts. The deception had lasted not weeks, but months, altering the balance of an entire campaign. The legacy of Fortitude South, the Great Deception Plan, became clearer with every page of captured documents. Reports filed in Berlin described entire divisions, regiments, and armored brigades that had never existed. Radio intercepts confirmed constant traffic. The crackle of phantom orders exchanged daily. German analysts had underlined words, circled figures, marked them reliable. Ink on paper outweighed the thunder of reality. For the men who built the illusion, the aftermath brought recognition tinged with irony. Artists who had stretched canvas over wooden frames to create tanks found themselves praised as warriors. Radio operators who tapped out endless false orders received commendations. One deception officer later said, "We fought with ink, rubber, and shadows, yet our tools were as sharp as any blade." British War Memoir, 1947. The tactility of their craft, handling rough fabric, tightening ropes, smearing paint, left as much imprint on victory as rifles and artillery. The sensory memory of deception was tactile in every sense. Rubber dummies that sagged under sun, plywood that warped in rain, paint that flaked under soldiers' hands. Allied engineers inflated tanks with pumps that squeaked, tied down decoys with coarse ropes, hammered pegs into stubborn ground. They felt victory through the rough texture of fakes, not the smooth steel of real guns. For Germany, the consequences lingered as bitter lessons. Historians later calculated that the Calais deception pinned up to 300,000 men through the decisive summer of 1944. That figure was more than the number engaged at the Battle of the Bulge. The Phantom had altered strategy, delayed reinforcements, and drained resources. "We lost not to the enemy's strength, but to his imagination," lamented one German officer during a post-war interrogation. Wehrmacht interrogation, 1946. The ethical debate grew sharper in the cold light of peace. Was deception fair? Geneva Convention said nothing of fake armies. Trickery had always been part of war. Trojan horses, false flags, feints. Yet never before had deception immobilized entire armies for months. Critics argued it was manipulation on a grand scale, robbing soldiers of the dignity of combat. Supporters countered that every German division held at Calais meant fewer Allied dead in Normandy. If lies save lives, Can they be condemned? Asked one Allied strategist years later. War College Journal, 1952. The question remains unsettled. Archival documents provided texture to memory. Pages yellowed with time, ink fading, but words still sharp. Main effort still to come. Calais sector priority. Reports bore the imprint of hands long gone. The feel of brittle paper, the uneven type of German machines, carried the weight of decisions that cost lives. Historians who sifted through files decades later felt the tactile link. History as something not only read, but touched. Civilians, too, remembered the deception in a different way. Villagers near Dover recalled the strange spectacle of rubber tanks lining fields, plywood aircraft on makeshift runways. They had touched the props, knocked on hollow sides, leaned against inflated armor. Children played among dummy camps, unaware they stood inside a weapon. The texture of fabric, the wobble of frames, were as real to them as steel tanks had been to soldiers across the Channel. The long-term legacy reshaped intelligence doctrine. Fortitude proved that imagination could achieve what divisions could not. The Allies institutionalized deception as a discipline. Manuals detailed how to blend real forces with illusions, how to construct props that fooled cameras, how to script radio drama convincing enough for analysts. Military schools taught officers to respect plywood as much as Panzerfausts. The feel of war had changed. Less steel, more stagecraft. In German memory, the deception scarred pride. Veterans spoke of waiting in bunkers, fingers tracing cold concrete, boots scraping damp floors. They recalled the weight of helmets, the grind of straps, the touch of rifles never fired. We trained until our hands bled, and for nothing. One wrote bitterly in 1950, Memoirs of the 15th Army. The tactile futility, preparation without action, haunted them more than defeat in battle. Post-war trials brought no charges for deception. The Allies argued convincingly that misleading an enemy was fair play. No law forbade inflating rubber tanks. No convention banned typing phantom orders. The absence of legal framework left only moral judgment, and history largely absolved the tricksters. Still, some German officers insisted they had been betrayed not by enemy strength, but by enemy cunning, a wound deeper than defeat in open fight. The impact echoed beyond Europe. In Korea, Vietnam, and later conflicts, commanders cited fortitude as precedent. Decoys, false radio nets, and phantom units reappeared. In an age of satellites and instant images, deception became harder, yet the principle endured. The tactile props of 1944, canvas, paint, wood, gave way to electronic illusions, but the philosophy remained. If you can make the enemy touch shadows, you have won without firing. By the time archives opened fully in the 1970s, historians pieced together the scale. The fake army included more than 1,000 dummy tanks, hundreds of aircraft models, and miles of canvas. Soldiers who built them remembered sore hands, raw fingertips, muscles aching from pumping air into rubber. Each blister became a contribution to victory. Their sweat, not only steel, broke Hitler's back. A British deception planner summarized with blunt pride, "We built victory with wood and paint. We carved it with ropes and brushes. We moved mountains with lies." UK National Archives, 1946. His words distilled the paradox. A war of industry, fought with tanks and planes, had turned at one point on carpenters, artists, and radio men. Tactile labor outweighed armor. The final lesson rests in numbers. Nearly 20 German divisions froze in place, more than 300,000 men neutralized. Allied losses in Normandy were staggering, over 200,000 killed, wounded, or missing, but would have been far higher if reinforcements had arrived earlier. Historians argue deception may have shortened the war by months. The Phantom Army cost only canvas, rubber, and lies. Its value was measured in thousands of lives spared. Today, visitors to archives can still touch the evidence. Files bound with frayed cords, pages brittle under fingers, photographs of rubber tanks propped in fields. The tactile link bridges past and present. The feel of paper, the smell of dust, the texture of truth hidden in lies. Each document whispers the same message. Sometimes what you touch is less important than what the enemy believes you can wield. In the end, the fake army that fooled Hitler stands as one of the greatest triumphs of imagination in war. It proved that steel can be matched by canvas, that conviction can be bent by shadows, that touch itself can deceive. German divisions touched bunkers, rifles, and maps, but they fought phantoms. Allied soldiers touched ropes, pumps, and plywood, and they fought with ghosts. The paradox endures. The most tangible victory was won by the least tangible means.